Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander viewers are advised that the following program contains images and voices of people who have died.
A massive search is underway tonight in remote parts of South Australia for a missing nurse who hasn't been seen in nearly 2 days. Police believe Gayle Woodford may have been abducted from her home in a stolen ambulance.
Keith Woodford has been a man on a mission, determined to make sure that nurses aren't risking their lives when they go out to work, particularly in clinics in remote Australia.
Woody loved Gayle and he would do anything for her when she was alive. So he's going to keep doing it for her now that she's gone.
Here we are, finally in Adelaide, with the findings of the coroner's handing down his recommendations. I'm feeling a little bit apprehensive, but I'm sure we'll be all right tomorrow.
Keith's a great guy, and I think he and his family have been very strong in pressing for changes.
A lot of things came out that really upset us. I thought that he would probably fall to pieces.
But he was determined. He wanted answers and he wanted to make things better in the future.
When Gayle and Keith got together, they were very young, but they were meant to be with each other. Perfect match.
I was working as a butcher in Adelaide and she was working in the chemist shop there and waiting for a traineeship to become a nurse, and that's where we met. She just had a smile that would melt anything. She was just beautiful. And we ended up getting married. We always said the kids had grown up, we would go straight up the centre of Australia and travel down the western side working, and that's what we were doing. Gayle was a hands-on nurse, and there was an opening in Fregon.
Fregon is a remote Aboriginal community that forms a part of the APY lands in South Australia. It's situated approximately 500 kilometres south to southwest of Alice Springs.
It's a little community, population of 260, I'd say. Fregon has a big family, so everyone here is a cousin of cousins, brothers of brothers. It's a family town, I should say.
Gayle thought that the people there were lovely. I got the job at the school as a groundsman.
Mrs. Woodford was part of Fregon. I worked for Ngana Health. She provided care and health for Aboriginal people out here, not only Fregon but right across the region.
Ngana Health Council provides all of the primary health care services across the APY lands, so it is steered by the community through their representatives. I think the Health Council runs a really high quality medical service with a lot of very dedicated staff.
Ngana do everything, adults and the kids. Immunization and a lot of sickness, and a lot of disease.
You just take a couple of deep breaths for me.
A remote clinic is completely different to any other clinic that you'll see.
Right, again.
You have to be a bit of an adrenaline junkie and you have to be pretty resilient. Otherwise, you just don't survive out there. You don't stay.
Start off checking your blood pressure.
On any day, you might see a pregnant mum, a sick baby, an adult with chronic disease, or trauma, someone who's been involved in a fight.
Sprained wrist.
Gayle loved her job. There's no other way to explain it. The women absolutely loved her, and they'd tell her things they wouldn't tell anyone else because they trusted her.
We called her Aunt, had here. Very loving, very caring, and would do anything for anyone here, out here on the APY lands.
Fregon is one of the communities that doesn't have a police presence, usually. Police resources are low, in my opinion, on the APY lands. They are overstretched in terms of being unable to respond to all of the domestic violence needs.
Because we were the only 24-hour response in the community, people came to us to be the mediators. It would regularly happen at Fregon that you would have to barricade in the clinic, lock the doors.
A common situation would be a domestic violence situation where we're looking after the woman who'd been hit in the clinic, and the man would come and be incredibly angry.
I think with regard to violence in communities such as Fregon, it is definitely a grave concern, not just for people who work in those communities, but certainly for residents of those communities that live there as well.
Yeah, I think the remoteness, sometimes the patchy level of services does create frustration, but I think people experience violence right around Australia in different communities.
After hours, one of us would be assigned to be on call for the night. And during that time, if you were needed, you'd park the ambulance outside your house, turn your front light on, and people would come to your house and ring your doorbell if they needed medical attention.
We had quite a significant mesh cage, and that was an area where you could walk from your front door and you could see through to the patient and see who was there.
We were always told, if you don't feel safe, don't open the cage, which is hard to do in practice. Your first instinct is to help that person. Being on call by yourself, that is the problem. That is when incidents occurred.
One time, Gayle was on call and this fella pulled up and said that he'd cut his finger and he needed a Band-Aid. And he then grabbed her by the breast and said he wanted to f*** her.
I could tell from the way she was talking that she was very affected by this incident. So then we decided we just couldn't let this go. We had to report it and get something done about it.
After that happened to Gayle, we sat down and I just said, well, don't you think we should think about moving? Gayle said, oh, well, I haven't finished my work yet. And I'm not letting one person push me out until I'm ready. And in hindsight, well, I should have said more, but I didn't.
I've got a patient I'm quite concerned about.
Each time there was an incident, none of her encouraged us to contact the police. If it was bordering into sort of criminal sort of things regarding assault or harassment, those sort of issues. But I feel that the follow-up on that was really lacking. There was no change in the way we did things or nothing put in place to prevent those kind of incidents happening again when you did report them.
I don't think there's ever been a security incident in which we haven't followed up. I think within the resources the organisation had, it would have always tried to do the best we could.
Frequently at clinical meetings, we raise the issue of safety. Then there was very much this culture of this is how it is, and if you don't like it, you don't work for us.
I'd completely dispute that. I mean, can you allay everybody's concerns about personal safety? No, you can't, but were they dismissed or not taken seriously? Absolutely not.
Wednesday the 23rd was a normal day at work. Gayle got home round about 8 o'clock and we had something to eat. She was on call. And I slept right through till 6 o'clock and I woke up and know that Gayle wasn't there. At 9 o'clock, I rang the clinic to speak to Gayle. They told me that she's not here and the ambulance is not here. And I said, well, maybe she could be out at the airstrip. I jumped in the work troopy and went out the airport and there was no ambulance. And that's when I knew that something was wrong. I knew she was in trouble.
The ambulance was missing, but fortunately had a GPS tracker which had tracked the ambulance to over 400 kilometres away to Cooper Pedy, and there was blood in the vehicle, so we were extremely concerned for Gayle's safety at that point. It's a vast, vast expanse of land. There's a lot of scrub, hills, extremely difficult to search.
We had trackers out, we had people looking everywhere, we had bikes out. Even people went out at night, came back late, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, from just out there searching, singing out.
The worst fears confirmed. Detectives find the body of the missing outback nurse, Gayle Woodford, in a shallow roadside grave.
The police said, there's no easy way to say this, but we found Gayle and she's dead.
When we found out she passed away, it brought a dark cloud over Fregon.
Right across the land, everybody went sad and really heartbroken.
We are having difficulty coming to terms with this unprovoked, premature end to Mum's life.
Our hearts are breaking every second.
Or we know that she was on call, she was working, she was supposed to attend to emergencies, but how she ended up being outside and gone is the mystery.
Police intercepted her work ambulance. Behind the wheel was a 36-year-old man. He is the man who is now charged with murdering her.
Now, your full name? Dudley Davey.
What we know about Dudley Davey is that he was one of these young men that witnessed a lot of domestic violence, a lot of abuse. He had a history going back almost 20 years at that stage of systematically attacking women, strangers. In 98, so 18 years earlier, when he was still a teenager, he attacked and indecently assaulted a nurse working in Fregon. He's been in jail for 14 of the past 18 years. Wasn't given any sexual offender treatment programs. He's then essentially given a bus ticket by a corrections office and sent to Marla in the far north, which is the gateway to the APY lands.
Dudley Davey had been living back in that community for many months before the offence occurred, as a free man, because he'd finished his sentence. Neither the parole board nor correctional services nor anyone in the criminal justice system at that time had any jurisdiction over him.
At the time of his arrest, it was mentioned that he was a man from Fregon. Now, that really angered the Fregon community, who said he's not one of ours. They didn't want him there after the previous attacks.
I'm investigating the disappearance and what I now believe is the suspected murder of Gayle Woodford.
His story was that he lured Gayle out on the pretense that his grandmother wanted a Panadol. After he got her into the ambulance, they've driven out of Fregon onto the main road through some scrub. Then he's raped her and then murdered her.
The almost universal view is this was a person who committed an evil act, that what he did is unforgivable, and that there's no excuse for what he did.
Dudley Davey took some time to plead guilty, eventually pled guilty, and was given a life sentence. He has a 32-year non-parole period.
It was very difficult to know how we felt about that sentence. I mean, no amount of time or length of sentence would bring Gayle back. I think there are a lot of unanswered questions.
I just want to know why I didn't wake up, why I didn't hear anything. And I'll always think it's my fault because I didn't do anything.
We were confused, we were numb. And we get this email from Safe Work SA saying that Gayle was not at work when she died. If you were up there working on call, you're at work. It's not rocket science. And it devastated our family.
Safe Work is a regulatory body in South Australia who's there to protect employers of all different workforces. Unfortunately, by the time Safe Work acknowledged that Gayle was performing her employment duties at the time at which her death occurred, too much time had elapsed in terms of Nunapa Health being obligated to speak or anything like that.
It was an incredibly tough time, but the nurses had they had a campaign and they had bandages on them, and there was these photos from all over Australia, and they were honouring our Gayle, and it was heartwarming.
Ms Woodford's death has prompted calls for better protection of health workers in outback areas. The nurse behind it says stories of abuse are unfortunately all too common.
The petition was for the federal government to act and pass a law that no nurse would ever work alone again.
It was the start of better working conditions and the start of improvement for the safety and welfare of nurses.
I guess the key thing that's happened since the murder is we implemented a program where after hours at night time, if people want to see a nurse, then they have to see a designated community member who's employed as an escort, so that a nurse never sees somebody after hours by themselves.
The family and the Nurses Federation were talking to parliamentarians and wanted a law that protected nurses better in remote communities by giving some security to them, some additional security.
Before this chamber considers this bill, I'd like to thank the Woodford family, husband Keith, daughter Alison and son Gary, for their tireless efforts since their loss to have governments implement Gayle's law.
It helped heal some of our heart that people cared and they realised how good of a person she was and what she did, and that they deserved better and Gayle deserved better.
It was an important step forward when Gayle's law passed the South Australian Parliament, and I was proud to be a part of the Parliament that turned a tragedy into something that hopefully can make things safer in the future for others.
We weren't going to let it end there. We were advised to write a letter to the coroner and request a inquest into Gayle's murder. We finally got a phone call from the coroner's office to say that in January 2020 there will be an inquest.
No worries. We're just happy now that we've got a date to finally find out, hopefully to find out what exactly happened to Gayle.
The inquest was set up to look into the circumstances surrounding Gayle's death. So what were the practices she was following as a nurse? How could things be better done? It was delayed because of COVID at different intervals, which is why it went for so long.
Keith attended, and that would have been hard work for him because you go through it all again. You know, you have to go through everything again.
The inquest into her death was told no extra security was put in place despite nurses requesting it.
A lot of things come out in there that I didn't know. One that the police, years before that, had warned Narrator Health that they need to do something about the security.
And Narrator Health requested that the police provide it security, basically, that they turn up and escort the nurses, and the police said that that wasn't suitable. We heard that as part of the evidence from police.
Narrator Health Council told the inquest it couldn't afford to employ extra security staff or additional nurses.
We learn about the vast number of systems and government, non-government organisations that really let Gayle down and made Gayle vulnerable to her attack. That included South Australia Police, corrections, the parole board. All of those systems had the opportunity to stop Dudley Davey.
Senior police and corrections staff are expected to face questions over the level of policing in the APY lands.
The Fregon elders were worried their community was going to get the blame for something that they hadn't done, that Dudley Davey, who was from a different town, he'd done it. And they wanted to know why the authorities had allowed him to be in the APY lands in the first place.
They should keep it there. That's a policeman problem. They shouldn't send him to Fregon. Not our problem. Our community is a really good community. And this person is no good. He's making trouble. Not from us.
So we're about to go in and get the findings handed down from the coroner. It's a pretty nerve-wracking feeling, isn't it?
It is, yeah, sort of apprehensive.
When the coroner tabled the report, the family's lawyer went through those recommendations.
So I think this is an important finding here.
We could not have got a better finding from the coroner.
Applying Gayle's law in a much broader way so that it covers nurses who are working remotely during the day as well as at night.
So we were pleased that everything that we thought came to fruition.
We're feeling really positive that we feel that Gayle's been exonerated of any kind of practising outside the guidelines or the policies set by Narrator Health. You know, it's come through quite strongly that the coroner feels that Gayle was doing her job and to the best of her ability and within all the safety practices that were in place.
In his 103-page report into Mrs Woodford's death, the Deputy State Coroner recommended that a permanent police presence be considered in the remote community of Fregon.
I just want to make a brief statement.
The coroner says there should be 2 people at all times, day or night, and that no one should present to nurses' houses for medical assistance.
We've only had a short time to consider the findings.
Going through the coroner's findings, he quite clearly feels that Dudley Davey should never have been released, that there's multiple organisations that should have recommended that Davey was never ever suitable for release, that the risk of the community was too great for him to be out, and in that sense that her death was preventable.
The coroner found there was a missed opportunity to keep Davey in custody and has recommended a change to the law requiring SA Police, Correctional Services and the Parole Board to tell the Attorney-General when a prisoner should be considered for indefinite detention.
South Australia has a provision in the Sentencing Act, which has been there for a very long time, where people who are found by the court to be incapable or unwilling to control their sexual impulses can be detained indefinitely. Applications to the court, which are going to involve potentially taking someone's liberty away, we need to have a basis for doing it. It's a very difficult thing for a court to do because you're essentially locking someone up in a prison, not because they've offended, but in case they might.
Gayle never had a chance from day one. It's important that these recommendations are acted on so no other family has to go and to endure what we have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree wholeheartedly with the coroner's recommendations. I've always been a strong supporter of having police presence in communities. For particularly violent offenders, I don't think they should be allowed back near vulnerable communities. And it's not just for the workers and the staff of those communities, but for other victims, locals, the women and the children.
From a tragedy, we've seen the advocacy of Gayle's family, and I think some good has come of it. I think there are changes that make it better and safer for people working the APY lands.
To look after every nurse from APY land, and we got to all be a partnership with the white man system. And we got to all work together. This is the first time happened to in our community, bad things ought to happen, you know.
Gayle always used to say that Woody would give the shirt off his back to anyone. And I think Woody will keep up his fight for nurses. He is really an amazing man.
Cheers.
The job's not finished. It's definitely not finished. What would we, as Australians, do without the nurses and the doctors and the carers? Surely they should be able to go to work and be safe. I think the main priority for the family and myself is to start up a campaign to make Gayle's Law Australia-wide, and we won't stop until it's done.